Welcome. Thank you for joining us for LEAP's ACT-SAT Test Planning Workshop. We're so excited to have you with us. We're going to get started with a poll, and just to kind of get a sense of who is joining us. Is your child in 9th, 10th, 11th grade, or perhaps another grade? So if you want to just launch that poll, or actually make your selection, and we'll kind of get a sense of who is joining us. Looks like we've got mostly 11th graders. About 75% of the folks have logged in as having an 11th grade child, and about 23%, actually we're up to 77% 11th, and then about 23 to 30% are saying 10th grade. Okay, so we're getting kind of even split, about not even split, but about that 30-70 split. So I'll go ahead and close that poll out. Thank you for participating. Occasionally you're going to see a poll pop up here and there. And let's see. Looks like we're having a little bit of an issue with the screen. Let's see if we can get that screen to show up for us. Okay, hang on just 1 second. All right, there we go. Thanks for your patience. Sometimes when I launch those polls, they do some funny things with the screen afterwards. So our goal tonight is that every family puts together an individualized plan for their child by the end of this webinar. So not every plan is going to be one size fits all. So we're going to try to make it customized for your child's specific situation. And our goal would be that your child's finished with testing by the time they start working on those college applications. So for those that are juniors listening in, that means that in just under a year from now, which is kind of scary, I have a junior myself, just under a year, the applications will go live. So kind of, keep that in mind, and we want to get that plan in place now so that we can minimize stress later. So LEAP has been in business since 1999. Lisa Marker-Robbins is the CEO, founder. She does all the curriculum writing and works as a liaison with all of our schools that we work with. And then I am Sherry Elmore. I'm the ACT-SAT director. So if you call and ask questions related to ACT, SAT, PSAT, any of that type of information that you're seeking, you're going to be put in touch with me. So I'll be your point of contact for that. And then we have a team of experienced instructors that tutor and teach our classes, and they are all phenomenal individuals that have a lot of experience and help our students get great results on their test scores. One of the attachments that was downloaded with this webinar looks like this. I don't know if you guys printed it or not. If not, you can kind of maybe print it out later and fill it out later. If you did go ahead and print it while you were waiting for the webinar to start, I'm going to be referring to this as we go through. This is kind of your worksheet to work through tonight to help you put that plan in place. Okay, so kind of keep that handy, and we'll refer to that as it. So when I say you should be in column 1, column 2, column 3, that's what I'm referring to. There's also a backside to this, and we'll get to that as we go through the presentation. So let's talk about an overview. We've got 10th and 11th graders on this call, on this webinar, and in 10th grade, some of you at some schools may be exposed to a PSAT test or a pre-ACT test. Not all schools do this, but there is a little bit of a trend towards some schools giving their 10th graders the PSAT to see who might qualify for national merit when they take the test as a junior. The PSAT test is the qualifying test to participate in the National Merit Scholarship Competition, and the score only counts when you take it as a junior. So some schools are kind of what you would say pre-screening sophomores to see who might be a good candidate to qualify as a junior. Other schools just give it to their junior class. So if you have, you might want to check with your school and find out what your school does. If your school only gives it to juniors and you feel like you have a really strong testing student, you may want to ask if they can take it as a sophomore. And then the pre-ACT is a test that's made available by ACT, and it's just exactly what it is, what it says. It's a pre-ACT test, just like the PSAT is a pre-SAT test. And so some schools have chosen to give the pre-ACT. So your child may or may not take one of those two tests during their 10th grade year. During 11th grade, typically in October, the PSAT is administered to all juniors. However, like I said, there is a little bit of a trend from some schools moving away from that. So you want to check with your school to find out what they do. That's why there's a question mark after that. And then throughout your junior year, you want to map out 2 to 3, possibly 4 times when you could take the ACT and SAT test. And we're going to go through in detail talking about the timeline tonight. And just to circle back real quick, if your school for some reason does not give the PSAT to 10th graders and you want your child to have a PSAT test score, LEAP in the spring does a diagnostic PSAT test. So you could have your child take the test through LEAP and we could kind of get a baseline score there. So I forgot to mention that. So, but jumping back to 11th grade, we will kind of map out tonight for 11th graders 2 to 3, maybe even 4 times when your child may take the ACT. I always recommend plan out 3 attempts. They may only need 2, but that way at least you're planned out in case you need 3. And then if senior year rolls around, in June, July, after your end of junior year, once June rolls around, you're a senior. So after your junior year in June, July, September, those would be your final possible attempts for ACT and SAT testing. So when you get to that 12th grade year, you're wrapping up the testing, and then applications go live August 1st. And then by November 1st, our goal, LEAP's goal, would be that every student has sent their application to colleges along with their ACT and SAT scores if you need to send those, and we'll talk about that later. As you can see, there's a bullet point there that says some colleges allow self-reporting of scores, so we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. The other thing we'll talk about is state testing. So there is a trend that some states are giving either the ACT or SAT to all students for free. So I'm going to do a quick poll here that says, do you know when your state test is? So we have folks on this call from all across the country. A lot of them are from the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana area because LEAP is located in Southern Ohio. However, there are people from Colorado and California and all over the country. So keep that in mind that sometimes refer to Ohio maybe a little bit more just because we're located in Ohio, but we do serve and work with families from all over the country. So the question was, do you know when your state test is? So about 42, 43% are saying, yeah, I know when that is. 30% are like, no, and 30 are like, I'm not sure. So we'll talk about that. That's something that your school, if you're in Ohio, your school gets to choose, and depending on what state you're in, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Let me close out this poll. Let's keep our fingers crossed that the screen pops back up for you guys. Okay, so in Ohio and in many schools, such as some of the states that I have listed up here, there is an opportunity for students to take a free ACT or SAT at school at no cost to the student or the family. So, for example, in the state of Kentucky, it's the ACT. In the state of Colorado, it is the SAT. I believe Michigan is also the SAT. And then in Ohio is somewhat unique in the sense that Ohio allows each school to choose which tests they're going to give. So it's done by school district. And this is a test that typically may or can count towards graduation requirements. In Ohio, it does. In other states, it may or may not. And it is an actual valid score that can be sent to colleges. If it's your best score, you can use it to apply to colleges. The dates are determined by ACT and SAT. So the dates are set across the country. So if your state gives the ACT, it's the same dates. There's 2 that you can choose from, the states can choose from, and that's February 20th or March 12th. And then if it's the SAT, excuse me, I believe it is, I want to say it's April 2nd, but don't quote me on that. So at any rate, check with your school district and find out when they're giving that state test. Now, one of the things we want to do is determine our busy season. These days, kids are so overscheduled, they're so busy, they're really, really maxed out. So if you're following along in the worksheet, I'm looking at the first column on the side that has the 4 columns. And step number 1 says determine your busy season. And really what I want you to do there is I want you to list out for the child that you're joining this webinar for. So I know many of you have multiple children and they all have different activities. But thinking about the child for which you've joined this webinar, think about their activities, their job, their volunteer, their sports, and write down their busy season. So for example, if they're in marching band, their busy season is going to be August through like late October, early November. If they are a baseball player, their busy season is going to be probably March through May. If they're a lacrosse player, it's probably going to be February through April. If they are in a swimmer, it might be in the winter. Or if they're in the school musical, what time of the year is that busy? Sometimes there's a fall musical or play and a spring one. So list those out. I want you to think about, something like a piano lesson that's consistent every, once a week for the year. Maybe you don't need to write that down. But if you know you always go on spring break, or if you know you always go on vacation right when school gets out, you want to list those types of things. If your child is taking a lot of AP tests, you want to list those out, okay? So list all of those things and what time of the year that activity is the busiest. All right, so that's the first thing I want to do is determine, say, when are we really busy? And most kids are busy all year round, but we're going to try to work our prep around maybe a slightly less busy time of the year. We've had families that have scheduled an ACT test for, let's say, June, and this is a true story, scheduled it for June, and then realized that their vacation, they were supposed to leave on Friday for the vacation, and the test was on Saturday. So we've had this happen on multiple occasions. Some families have changed the test date and had their child take the test on vacation, which doesn't sound very fun to me if your family's all sitting on the beach and then the one child has to go take the test. I'm not sure if that's a great framework for the students to do their best. And then we had another family, and it's been about 7 or 8 years since this happened, but they literally dropped their kid off at the test, went home, packed up the minivan, and the whole family was parked in the parking lot of the school waiting for student to finish the test. And then they left a day late for vacation. They were supposed to leave Friday. They left on Saturday, and they literally were waiting in the parking lot, practically honking the horn for the student to finish the test. I'm sure they didn't really honk the horn because that would have been distracting, but you get the idea. So if you can avoid things like that, it just reduces stress for everyone. Okay, moving along. ACT versus SAT. So real quick poll while we start talking about this. And this answer, you may not know the answer to this right now, and that's okay. But do you know which test your child is planning on taking? And again, it's okay. You may not know right now, but at the end of this, you might have a better sense. Sometimes people will take both and then determine which one they think their child does better on, and that's what we're going to talk about on this slide. If you're not really sure, I'm going to give you some tips to kind of guide you tonight. So I've got about half the people are saying ACT only, about 20% are saying both, and about 30% are saying, gosh, I'm not really sure. And that's okay. But that gives me an idea of kind of where your mindset is as we start this. So as we move on to this, there are some different things that you can do if your child ends up taking the ACT and the SAT both, or what we recommend is comparing a student's PSAT score from their junior year to one of their first ACT scores during the junior year. And because the PSAT score translates really well into an SAT score. And there are a couple different ways that you can go about doing this. So we have on our website, if you look, and I'm going to get a little pointer tool here. Let's get the spotlight. So if you look up here in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there is a little screenshot of something called the ACT-SAT score converter. We have on our website this converter, and this little green dot here is a sliding scale that you can move one direction or the other, and it will tell you that you can put it on, let's say you have an ACT score of a 23, it'll tell you that equals an SAT or PSAT score of 1130. So it's a really nice little chart. It's on our website in several locations. So it's an easy way to compare the scores. There is a concordance. I'm going to show you that in the next slide. And you can also look at the percentiles, like what percentile did your child score on the ACT and what percentile did they score on the PSAT. So if they're both in the top 30 percentile, then they're about equal. Or maybe if you're in the top 30 percentile on the ACT, but the top 50th percentile on the SAT or PSAT, you'd know that you'd want to focus on the ACT where you're in the top 30th percentile. In the absence of scores, especially in the state of Ohio, 97% of the schools in Ohio have chosen to give the ACT for their state test. And historically, the ACT is a little bit easier to improve. So if you have no data and you're not sure what to do, I say go ACT. It's a little more straightforward, but again, we'll give you some more tips on how to make that determination later. There is also a really nice ACT-SAT concordance in it, and this is a graphic that shows you, for example, if you had a 22, let's go 20, a 20 on the ACT, that converts to a score range on the SAT between a 1030 and a 1050, or the PSAT as well. If you ended up getting a 28 on the ACT, that would be equivalent to somewhere in the 1300 to 1320 range on the SAT. So really nice chart. We have this on our website as well. If you go to our College Bound blog, you can find this concordance on our website. Okay, let's talk about one of the key components of determining when your child should start this whole process, because this is really a critical piece to the whole testing process. The key component is really your math completion. So, and I'm going to jump into this 1 second. I forgot to refer to the worksheet. If you're following along on the worksheet, step number 2 was to kind of determine which test your child prefers. So if you have previous ACT and SAT scores, you can list them there and then use our converter chart or the concordance chart to determine which scores are higher. If you're really stuck on that piece of the puzzle, please don't hesitate to call me or email me. I'm happy to help you. There's never a charge for that service. You can call and we can talk through it and I can help guide you. Okay, so that's the second column. Now we're going to jump over to the third column on that worksheet and talk about the math completion. So what I want you to do is I'd like for you to, first of all, I'm going to do another poll, but I want you to write down the math class that your child took in 10th grade in that third column and the math class your child is taking in 11th grade. And so the poll I'm going to launch to you says, will your child complete Algebra 2 prior to 11th grade? So that means, did your child take Algebra 2 in 10th grade, or sometimes, crazy enough, there are kids that take it in 9th grade, or maybe they're taking it over the summer between 10th and 11th grade. So yes or no, okay? And there's no right answer here. It's more just to help me guide on how I'm talking to families that are joining us today. Okay, so I'm getting 70% are saying yes, they will complete Algebra 2, and 30% are saying no. Okay, helpful to know as I go through this process. So basically, the test, both the ACT and the SAT, have math concepts that go up through Algebra 2, and the ACT even has some very basic trigonometry, or pre-calc, whatever term you want to use, on it. So the typical 11th grader takes Algebra 2 as a junior. And in that case, those juniors taking Algebra 2, your state test is going to be your first attempt. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this on the next slide, but just kind of keep that in mind. Those juniors that have already completed Algebra 2 and might be taking a pre-calc class, or maybe stats, or maybe a calculus class, you're ready to go at the end of 10th grade. So you can get started at any point in time, starting in June after 10th grade year, moving forward. But we really want kids to get at least halfway through Algebra 2. And there are a couple schools out there that reverse the math sequence and do Algebra 1, then Algebra 2, then geometry. So if your school does reverse that sequence, then you want to be halfway through geometry. So interchange geometry whenever I say Algebra 2, if your school is in that, falls in that camp. There are a few other schools out there that do integrated math 1, 2, and 3. So again, you want to be either completed with integrated 3 or halfway through integrated 3 to really seriously start testing. Because if you're not, then you're missing out on up to 30% of the concepts that could be on the math portion of the ACT. All the other areas, the English, the reading, and the science, you are going to be equipped by the end of sophomore year with the content knowledge needed. It's really that math piece that kind of is the driving factor. All right, moving on. We're going to flip over on that worksheet. So the worksheet, if you did print it out, you're going to go to the back side, and I want you to interact. You're going to be circling dates in a minute or two here. So we're going to look at the ACT dates and SAT dates. And what I want you to try to do is think about your child's activities. And I'm going to guide you through mapping out 2 to 3 times when your child will test during their junior year, possibly into the summer after junior year or start of senior year, however you want to look at that. So we're going to be looking at the back of that worksheet. All right, so if you are a kiddo who has completed Algebra 2 by the end of 10th grade, so you've completed Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 by the end of 10th grade, you are going to choose from one of these dates as your first attempt. There may be juniors on this webinar right now, or families who have juniors, whose child already took the test either on June 9th or July 14th, or are planning on taking it soon. So you really want to, if you've already taken it, you can kind of circle that. If you haven't, you want to look at your activities, look at what's coming up in your schedule, and choose a date. If you've completed Algebra 2 at the end of 10th grade, your state test hopefully you can get one in before the state test that's offered at your school. If not, that needs to be your first attempt for sure. For those people that are taking Algebra 2 as a 11th grader, your state test is going to be your first attempt. So that's why the state test is in kind of red there. There are a few cases where if you're taking Algebra 2 as an 11th grader, that you may take the December test, especially kids that are heavy on spring sports and or musical or different activities that are really heavy in the spring. You may want to get a test in on December 8th and do the state test as your second attempt. So circle when your first attempt would take place. For those that fall in this area up here, meaning that your first attempt is going to occur in one of these dates, your second attempt is going to be either the state test if you've done one of these tests up here, or either June or July, one of these two for sure. And then that leaves a third attempt for either July or September if needed. And it's possible that somebody may do one of these tests as their first, this is their second, and then June or July could be their third. That's for kids that have completed Algebra 2 as a 10th grader. For kids that are in Algebra 2 as an 11th grader, one of these is going to be your first attempt, one of these will be your second attempt, and then you've got your third attempt down here, okay? So really think about that, and you might want to have a conversation with your child. You might want to really think about looking at the calendar, and these are all the dates for the 2018-2019 school year, okay? Really, September 7th of senior year needs to be the final attempt. There are some deadlines that can be November 1st, and so there are no dates beyond that that would actually work. Now, if you have a state test in your state, and it's the ACT, you do want to avoid, there are a couple national test dates that I did not have listed over here on the left. So you want to avoid February 9th and April 13th if your state offers the state test. Because the reason is the state test is going to fall so close to one of these two dates that it's going to make it, you're not going to be able to get the scores back and make any changes in your score. So these would be sort of off limits if your state offers a state ACT test. If your state, if you live in a state like a Colorado or a Michigan that does the SAT, and you want to take an ACT, then these 2 dates would fill in place of the state test. So wherever it says state test, you'd fill in these 2 dates. And then seniors, we want to avoid October. That's just not going to be a good time. Some seniors can take it in October, but ideally you're going to avoid that if at all possible. So let's talk about the SAT, and that's basically going to be the next column on the back side of that worksheet. And I'm not going to go through this as in depth just because it seems like we've got a lot of SAT-focused kiddos on this call, but I'll give you a quick overview. Same concept's going to apply here. If you're finished with Algebra 2 at the end of 10th grade, you're going to choose one of these dates that's above the line as your first attempt, and then your state test might be your second attempt, but for sure that's going to be your very first attempt. It's the latest. And then if you are in Algebra 2 as a junior, your first attempt is going to occur down here, one of these attempts, down one of these dates. And then if your state offers the SAT as the state test, you want to avoid March 8th because this state test date falls right around March 8th. It's too close. If your state doesn't offer the SAT, then the March 8th date would substitute in where the state test date is. And then seniors, I would suggest avoiding November because that's going to be rough for some deadlines. It's not going to make some of the deadlines for, first of all, there are some, very few, but there are some colleges out there that have a November 1st deadline. Obviously, if you're taking it in November, that's after November 1st. So your score is not going to arrive on time. Now, subject tests are given by the College Board, which is the company that runs the SAT. Some colleges require or recommend them, although there is a trend of sort of moving away from the requirement of these subject tests. Even a few of the Ivies have dropped them recently. So always check to see if you're looking at highly selective schools, those are going to be the schools that are going to most likely recommend or require. If it says it's recommended, we highly suggest that you take the subject test. Obviously, if it's required, you need to take the subject test. These are the dates that the SAT subject tests are offered. They're never offered in March. I'm not quite sure why, but they aren't. The 2 that we like the best are the 2 that are highlighted in orange there, which is May and June. And the reason we like those the best is typically you're going to want to take a subject test in a content area where you've taken an AP course. So you want to take the SAT subject test at the conclusion of the AP course in order to basically best prepare yourself for that test. So there's really not a way to study for these tests necessarily. It's more of a just take them in the areas that you excel and or that you've taken an AP course that you feel like you excel in. Okay, so those are, you can take it on any of these dates listed, but these are our favorites for maximizing your result. By the way, I didn't mention at the very beginning, I should have said this, we will do questions. There is a question feature where you can type in questions. I will answer those. I've kind of glanced a couple times through and I see that there's a couple questions. I will try to answer those as we go through, and at the end, I'll try to answer those if I didn't. And I've got someone that says, is the same available for pre-ACT? Oh, I think somebody asked, maybe referring to the diagnostic test for the PSAT, somebody said, is the same available for the pre-ACT? And the answer to that is yes. We do offer a free diagnostic ACT test throughout the year. We offer it on every single national ACT and SAT test date. So the next one coming up is September 8th. You do have to be within driving distance of Mason, Ohio in order to do that. But it's free, there's no charge, and the student will leave with their test booklet and all of their answers, and then we do a follow-up 20-minute webinar to explain the results, and if you register for the webinar, then we'll email you your score before the webinar, and then if you do join one of our programs, if you participate in the program later on with LEAP, we do give you all the answers to the test. So that's a really nice option. So that is definitely a free option that's available, and the next date is September 8th, and then after that's October 27th, and then December 8th. So if you have a sophomore that you want to get a jump start, or a junior, maybe you're taking Algebra 2 and you're not quite ready to start testing for real, but you want to get your feet wet, great opportunity for those kiddos to get started. So great question. Thank you very much for asking that question, Raju. Okay, so when should you revise your plan? So we've kind of started to map out a plan. We sort of have an idea of when we might test. Sometimes you've got to revamp. Sometimes things don't go as planned. So we've had crazy things happen to kids on test day. True story, we had a girl driving to the February ACT test a few years back. She left in plenty of time to get there. It was an icier, kind of a little bit of a slick day, a little bit of snow on the ground. She got into a fender bender on the way to the test. She was still able to make it to the test and take the test, but her test score was not her best effort because she was a little rattled. We've had boyfriends break up with girlfriends the night before the test. We've had kids get sick in the middle of the test where they physically felt ill and had a fever by the end of the test. We've had, last year, there was a student taking a test, and the marching band was literally practicing outside of the window, which I can't even believe was allowed to be happening. So the student couldn't concentrate. We've had situations where the air conditioner was broken. So it's, hot out and the air conditioner isn't working. So you just never know what's going to happen on test day. There's so many variables. Ideally, your child goes in, they feel great, they're in a great mood, they got a good night's sleep, they had a good breakfast, and they're on their best, and they do their best, but that doesn't always happen. So that could result in additional testing attempt. Sometimes kids can't resolve their pacing issue on the ACT, so they might need to practice some more and then retake it. Sometimes you think, I'm going to focus on the ACT only, and you're all in mode of, I've mapped out when I'm going to take the ACT 3 or 4 times, and then, oh, lo and behold, you get the PSAT scores, and you're like, oh, wait a second, these scores are actually higher than my ACT scores. I got to take the SAT. So then you got to revamp. Sometimes you find out that, gosh, I've applied to college, and this has happened twice in the last 2 years. A student is a senior, they apply to college, they get into the college of their choice. It's springtime of senior year, and they find out from the college, hey, if you can get your score up 1 or 2 more points, we'll give you an additional $10,000 over 4 years, another $2,500 or $3,000 off a year in scholarship money. So here we've got a kid that's in second semester senior year, and they find out that they could get between $10,000 and $20,000 more over the course of 4 years if they can raise their score 2 points. So most of the time these kids are motivated. So we have had twice in the last, like I said, it might be 3 years, 2 or 3 years, where we've had seniors coming to us to prep for the ACT. And last year, a girl took the ACT after she graduated from high school in June. She literally already had a high school diploma. She went and took it. But guess what? She got her score up, those 2 points, and she qualified for an additional, I want to say hers was like $12,000 over 4 years. That's sizable. So it does happen. You might not ever think, you might think after 2 attempts you're finished, and then you find out, gosh, if I can get 1 more point or 2 more points or 3 more points, I could get to that next level of scholarship money. So that's when you sort of have to revise your plan. And we're here to help kind of walk you through that. If you have questions, you can always give us a call. All right, moving on. Let's talk just for a few minutes about ACT and SAT content and what's on the test. Like, how is the test laid out? How are they similar? How are they different? So I'm going to deep dive for a minute into these 2 tests and give you some information. So the ACT and SAT are made up of 4 content areas and a 5th one that's optional. They both have English. On the ACT, they call it English. On the SAT, they call it writing. So, and it tests your knowledge of grammar, skills, and your writing. They both have a section that's called reading that focuses on your reading comprehension and speed and your knowledge of vocabulary. They both have a math section that goes up through Algebra 2 with a teensy bit of pre-calc/trig. The ACT has a special section that's actually called Science that focuses on your reading and interpreting data and comprehension. whereas the SAT has chosen to sprinkle the science information throughout the test. So they don't have a special section called science, but they'll have questions that are scientific in nature on the test. And then you'll see in that lighter purple, it says essay. And I have that in lighter purple because it's optional. And we'll talk about that more. We'll have a whole slide on that later. But it's an opportunity for students to do a writing piece in a time setting, and it's usually an opinion type of a situation. So the tests are more similar than they ever were, which is a good thing, but there are definitely some differences between the two tests. So let's look at that. On this slide, what I've tried to do, I'm going to use my little pointer here to kind of identify where I am. Things to think about for the two tests. So on the ACT, it is a faster paced test. It is very tightly timed on the pacing as far as the number of questions and the amount of time you have to complete those. So it's definitely something that most kids struggle with, but it's also something that can be overcome and with a lot of timed practice. Some kids do qualify for extended time, and I may have a slide on that later. I hope I do. If not, I'll try to circle back and talk about it at the end. The reading level on the ACT is a 9th, 10th grade reading level. Okay, so very doable for most kids. However, it's a lot of words. So it's a lot of reading, but a 9th, 10th grade reading level. When you get to the SAT, it is a much higher reading level. It is a 12th, and they call it 13th, 12th, 13th grade reading level, which means senior in high school, first year college reading level. The vocabulary is more challenging. So while the reading passages are shorter, it's going to be a higher level reading process. So kids are going to have to be able to read on a deeper level. So you have to weigh that. Again, that goes with the vocab. It's easier vocab on the ACT, not as many direct questions on vocabulary, much more vocabulary on the SAT and higher level vocabulary. The ACT also has fewer questions that require inferencing, and they're more direct and straightforward. So kind of keep that in mind. I also said lower reading level, so I've kind of hit all 4 of these. Math, let's talk about the math. So the ACT math, the general consensus is that over the last 5 years, the ACT math has become slightly more challenging. So, I would say that if you can get through the first 2/3 of the ACT math test, you can get a pretty darn good math score. The math test on the ACT is laid out where for the majority of the questions, they start with a little bit easier and work towards the harder questions at the end. However, that doesn't mean that question number 10 isn't going to seem really difficult for some students. So, and that question number 55 might not be really easy. So that's just a general rule of thumb. The math content does go up through Algebra 2, and it includes 4 to 6 questions that are trigonometry based. Now, of those 4 to 6 questions, do not worry, students, if you have not had pre-calc, because of those, 2 to 3 of them are on a concept that was covered in geometry called right triangle trig. So if we do have any students that are listening in, you know the memory technique called SOHCAHTOA, you remember that from geometry, and you can do a SOHCAHTOA problem, then you're going to be able to do a few of those, what they call pre-calc trig questions on the ACT. The calculator is allowed to be used on the entire math portion of the test, and the entire test is multiple choice for the ACT. Now, when we jump over to the SAT, the good news for some kids is that only 6% of the questions are geometry based. It's pretty heavy on geometry for the ACT test. So only 6% are geometry based on the SAT. However, down here, I want you to jump down to these 2 bullet points. There is a no calculator section on the math portion. There are going to be a set of questions that are going to be presented to you that you are not going to be allowed to use your calculator for. And I want to say it's like 13 questions. And then the other section, you are allowed to use your calculator. In addition, on the math portion of the test, there is something called non-multiple choice questions, or what they call free response questions. I believe there are maybe 5 of those on the non-calculator section, and I want to say 8 on the calculator section for a total of 13. those are going to be the types of questions where you work out the problem. There's no multiple choice to choose from at the end. They provide you with a little grid. You write your answer in on the grid, and then you bubble in a corresponding number to go with the answer below it. So that can rattle some kids. It's definitely something you want to practice ahead of time. So while the math might be technically slightly easier, you got to take into account that there's a non-calculator section, and for non-math kids, just the idea of not being able to use your calculator can be stressful for some kids. The best thing to know, folks, is that all colleges accept both tests on equal footing. So really, really important to know that any college in the country will take either test. So the goal for you and the student should be, let's figure out which test the student is best at taking, and let's get that score as high as we possibly can get it. All right, what is the right choice? Meaning the writing portion of the test. It's an optional portion. And I have a poll on this, but I'm not even going to launch the poll because this is something that is kind of going by the wayside. Last year, I want to say there were 50 colleges in the country that required the writing portion of the ACT or SAT. It's down to 19. If you want to see what those 19 schools are, you can jump on our website and go under our College Bound blog, and you'll be able to see which schools require the writing. So definitely check that out. Basically, for all those Ohio folks, there are no schools in the state of Ohio that require the writing or recommend it. The biggest group of schools that do are the University of California school system. They are still requiring the writing portion, and I'm not exactly sure how they use it. I think they might use it to help placement for first-year English, but don't quote me on that. But that's really, in our opinion, the main reason why the writing test is still in existence for the ACT and SAT test. If most of you adults, if you're on this call and you took the ACT or SAT when you were in high school, there wasn't even a writing section. That wasn't even an option. It came into being about maybe 10 to 12 years ago. And what we're seeing is, I think colleges just realize that it's really hard to write a great writing selection or writing piece. In the ACT gives you 40 minutes and the SAT gives you 50 minutes. So it's just not a lot of time. So what we're seeing is that more and more schools are dropping it. A few Ivies dropped it this year for the current senior class that's applying to college. So our crystal ball tells us that we believe in the near future this test may go completely away, especially if the University of California system stops requiring it. I think that's really the main bulk of those 19 schools. And even those schools that are outside of those, outside of California that are requiring it, that are in that 19, they're going to maybe drop off as time goes on. So don't feel like, that your child has to take it. I have a student that is a sophomore in college, and when he took the ACT, and he took it 3 times, I made him take the writing every single time at that point in time, because at that time, there were still numerous schools that were requiring it, and he did not know where he wanted to apply. I now have a rising junior who is going to take the test and hasn't taken it yet, but will take it a couple times this year, and I am not going to make him take the test at all. So, not the writing portion, let me clarify. He's going to take the ACT, but not the writing portion. So, and I've already determined for my current junior, that he's a better ACT tester based on a diagnostic test he took with LEAP on an ACT, and then he did take the PSAT as a sophomore, and so I already know he's going to be focusing on the ACT, but I'm not going to make him do the writing. So, if you feel the need and your child needs to take it, we do offer a free webinar. As a matter of fact, we have one coming up tomorrow night that will talk about the writing portion of the ACT if you want your child to join it. But, it's definitely not something that I would stress out too much about. So, a prep plan. Really, the best plan can help you minimize the number of times you take the test and save you money. So we have been doing ACT test prep since 1999, and we have a proven methodology that really does work. We work with about 1,500 students in the Cincinnati area, in addition to students that do our online courses. So we do have an online ACT, SAT course, and those students can be anywhere in the country taking that class. But 97% of our students do see an increase in their score after taking programming with us, with an average increase of 3.4 composite points and a range of from 1-point composite up to 11-point composites. So our recommendation would be for a student to do prior to their first attempt, and if they want to do a diagnostic practice test, kind of cold test just to get a baseline, that's fine. But prior to their first real attempt, they do a prep course, a strategies-based ACT, SAT prep course, like the one that LEAP offers. And ours is very affordable. It's 5 sessions, so definitely something to check into. We have in-person in the Cincinnati area as well as our online. And we sometimes get Cincinnati kids that want to do it online, because the nice thing about the online course is that you can do it anytime. It's offered live, quote unquote, on a specific day and time, but if you can't attend that day and time, you get a recording and you can do it later. And then take your first attempt and see how your score is. From there, give me a call, email me. I'll work with you to kind of assess the situation and see how close you are to your goal, and then we can put together a plan. Some kids may want to focus in on with individual tutoring on a particular area. Not all kids need that, but some may. And then take it again on a second attempt. And 57% of all kids that take a second attempt improve their score. Now, if you look at that, that's 57% of all kids that retest improve their score. LEAP kids are getting 97% of our kids are improving their score. So we're getting a really great return on investment. So what do you expect? You're going to need to register, except for the state test. The state test, if your child takes it at school, will be registered for by the school. But when you take it any other time, you're going to have to register your child. And we did have a couple parents this year where their child took the state test, was their first attempt, and then they were prepping for June, and they didn't realize that they had to sign their child up, because they just assumed because the school did it the first time that the school would do it the second time. So that's only the time the school's going to do it is for that state test, if your state offers that. Otherwise, it's on you to sign up. So here are the websites, act.org, sat.org. Register early. Sometimes sites do fill, popular times of the year. You can typically get your score about 2 weeks after the test date by logging into your child's ACT or SAT account and seeing their scores. You can log in and see the scores. The cost is $50.50 for an ACT, $47.50 for an SAT. If you do need to take it with the writing, here are the prices, ACT and SAT with the writing component. If you're going to send the scores to colleges, it costs you $13 to send them for an ACT and $12 to send an SAT. Now I'm going to talk about this really quick, and then we're going to talk about self-reporting, because that's a new trend. And I'll talk about that as I talk about this little bit of information here. So there is a new trend with schools, and I did attach this, and I'm not sure if this attachment came through, because I did see somebody that says, I don't see the form. If you didn't get either of the attachments, and they should have been attached to the email that came out an hour before the webinar. But if you didn't get it, send me an email or put a question in here and I'll send it to you afterwards. But we did try to attach the schools that are allowing students to self-report their scores. So this is a new trend, because as you can see, it's quite costly to send scores to colleges. My own son, who's a sophomore in college, applied to 8 schools, and I did not send any of the scores ahead of time because I wanted control of which scores the colleges got to see. So I only sent his best score at the end to all 8 schools. At the time, ACT was charging $12. So it cost me, actually, he applied to 7 schools, excuse me. 7 schools times $12, it cost me $84 to send his scores out to all these different colleges. So that adds up quickly. So a new trend that is just coming into play is what they're calling self-reporting. And that is where colleges are allowing students to self-report their score when they apply on the application. And in most cases, that's on the Common App, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And you self-report your score. And then if you get into the college and you decide to attend that college, then you would send the scores you would pay ACT to send the score just directly to the college that you're going to go to. So that's actually really awesome because that's going to save people a lot of money. You can send 4 schools to a college, quote unquote, for free or included in a test attempt whenever you take the test and you pay for it, or the state test that's offered. You can choose 4 colleges, and those 4 colleges will automatically get your child's scores. At LEAP, we personally recommend that you don't do that. We recommend that you hold on to the scores, look at the complete set of test scores that your child has, and decide which scores you want to release to the colleges. So if you're doing that, it can really add up if you haven't sent any scores ahead of time, which is why this self-reporting is going to be really cool for a lot of kids. Now, you want to check the list to see which schools self-report. The thing that's key here, kids, you've got to report your scores accurately when you self-report. If you report them inaccurately and you decide to go to that college and then you send your scores and your scores don't match up with what you self-reported, they could revoke your admission to that college. So it's really, really, really important that if you self-report, you do this correctly. So with self-reporting, basically what happens is on the Common App, it asks you the way it's set up, the way the Common App is structured, and the Common App is an application. It's one application that you fill out and then you submit it to multiple colleges. So again, parents, you probably remember back in the day, literally pencil to paper, writing out 4 or 5 different applications by hand. That is no more. You fill out one online application, and then at the end you click which schools you want to submit it to, and you're going to pay and do all that, but it's one common app. So on this Common App, there's a section of it where it says, what is your highest English, your highest math, your highest reading, your highest science, and your highest composite? And the same with the SAT. So effectively what you're doing is something called a super score. So I've got a slide on that, and I'll show you that in just a quick second here. I'll show you how the super scoring works. But that is really going to be nice because any college that's allowing you to self-report is effectively going to be super scoring, which in a lot of cases, or in some cases, can result in a student having a higher composite score than they might have had on any individual test attempt that they've taken. And again, I have a graphic of that. We'll get to that in just one second. But I do want to talk about accommodations before we jump up onto the super scoring. And then we are getting close to wrapping up. So I'm going to hopefully keep this to right about an hour, and if you can bear with me for a couple more minutes, and then we'll answer questions. So if you feel as if your child might qualify for accommodations, please request those early. You can't request them until your child is signed up for a test date. So you want to sign up as early as possible and then start the process for requesting accommodations. Once the accommodations are approved, then you will get those for all future test attempts. And that's the same with both the ACT and the SAT. Reasons that your child might qualify for accommodations. Perhaps they have a visual impairment and they need a reader, like somebody to read the test to them. Or they might need the test to be played, they have a recording of it where you can play it auditorily. Or maybe they need a scribe, somebody to write bubble in the answers for them. Or perhaps you might be a diabetic and you might need breaks. So you might need to take the test in a room where you're allowed to have breaks. Or for kids that maybe have Crohn's, they may need to have bathroom breaks. So you might be qualified to be able to stop the test and take a bathroom break. Other kids might qualify for extra time. So if you have a plan in place at school, typically those are called a 504 or an IEP plan that allows you to have extended time on tests in the regular classroom, then you may qualify for getting extended time on the ACT or SAT. The types of extended time that are available are typically 50% extra time, which means you basically have 50% longer on every section, and it takes about 5 hours to take the test instead of 3. Well, I guess it'd be 4.5-ish. And then there is 100% extended time where the test is broken up over a period of days. So you get double the amount of time, and you might just take one section per day. So kind of keep that in mind. So definitely apply early for that. When you do this process, there's going to be a component that the parent fills out to start the application process online, but then there will also be a component that the school counselor has to fill out. So it's a dual application process, part done by the parent, part done by the school. Okay, jumping ahead, let's go back to super scoring and this self-reporting thing. So if a child has taken multiple tests and perhaps their scores have fluctuated between the individual areas over the multiple tests, you may have a super score that would be higher than any individual attempt. Basically, by the way, any college that requires the writing will actually super score the writing, take the writing from one attempt, and then an overall higher composite from another. So as long as you've taken the writing one time, if you're applying to a school that requires writing, you should be fine. Okay, so computing your super score. Basically, this is a real student from a couple of years ago. He took the first test cold, actually, and got a 24. Great score. He was pretty happy with it. But then he came to LEAP and he worked with LEAP and he took our class and got a 27. Even better score. That's awesome. So what happened is, as you notice here, he actually dropped in English on his second attempt, but it looks like he kind of went up in most of his other areas. So we're going to compute this student's super score. And this is an actual student, an actual LEAP student, so keep that in mind. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at each individual area and pull the highest score no matter which test it came from. So we're going to take the English score from his first test attempt, and I'm going to put it over in the super score column. And then for math, we're going to take the math score from his second attempt. Both of those are 26s. And then we're going to take the reading score from his second attempt, because that was the highest at a 28. And then we're going to pull that science score, which is a 30, from the second attempt. So basically, his second attempt was higher for 3 areas, but his English score was higher on his first attempt. So, and by the way, I'm just going to make a side note here. This happens all the time. What happens is kids, if you can see, this was his highest score the first time. So kids get really confident and they think they don't need to spend as much time on this area. So they focus on their other weaker areas, and the other areas come up and the strong area drops a little. We typically see this even more so from a kid that's scoring in the mid-20 range. We typically see this more often when a kid is scoring in the 30s to start in an area. So please don't ignore a strong area and think that you don't need to focus on that on the second attempt. So at any rate, in this particular case, here are the highest scores. What I've got down here is the total. This kid got a 96 total points. That's adding up these 4 scores. So you get a 96. And over here on this test, you add up the 4 scores and you get 108. And when you divide each of these out, which is an average, this is what the student had each time. Okay. So now for this particular student, if you add up, you can see he has 110 points. So that's higher than what he had on his second attempt. And when you divide that out, it's a 27.5, which rounds up to a 28. So the cool thing is for kids, if you have a 0.5, that's going to round you up. A 0.75 is going to round you up. If you had 27.25, sadly, that's going to round you down. So it does correctly mathematically round you to the right value. So if this student were self-reporting his scores on the Common App to a school that allows self-reporting, he would put down these high scores for each area and put down a 28, and then if he gets accepted and chooses to go to that school, he would send both sets of these scores to the college at the end, once he's accepted to go to the school. If you're applying to a school that does not self-report, and they do allow super scoring, you would still want to send both sets of scores to a school that does allow super scoring. If you are applying to a school that doesn't self-report and does not super score, you would simply just send the second set of scores. There's no reason to send this composite score of 24. I would just send the 27, okay? So that's kind of how that works. All right, we are coming to the end of the presentation. I do want to mention that we are happy to do a free testing, give you further guidance on a testing timeline, testing plan. If you just want to talk it through with me, you can email me, give me a call. Our email's right here, info@leapprogram.com. Our website where you can pull down, if you want to pull out the list of schools that require the writing, that'll be in our College Bound blog. If you look across the top at the tabs on our website, go to College Bound blog. Also in the College Bound blog, you can find the concordance. If you're looking for that sliding scale chart, that's going to be on our main homepage and also on the College Bound blog. And while I'm still talking, if anybody has questions, I'm going to kind of try to go through these questions and answer any questions you guys have. It looks like there's a few. So I'm going to start answering questions. But please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have additional questions. If I don't get to your question for any reason, or I don't answer your question, please email me and I will make sure, or you can enter it into the question feature and I will make sure to answer it for you and respond. Okay. If you didn't get the attachments, let me know. I will send them to you. Let's see. Okay. Do certain colleges want to see both test scores to consider your students? Okay, that's a good question. There are a few highly selective schools that will word their application to say, we want to see all test scores that your child has ever taken. And in that case, you're on your honor to submit all of them. They really can't find out how many times you've taken the ACT or SAT, but it is on your honor to submit all scores. So if you are applying to highly selective schools, you do want to be somewhat focused, or kind of have a focused plan and determine when you're going to actually take the test. Don't just keep taking it willy-nilly without prepping, because you don't want to submit all of those scores. Another question I get all the time is, how many times can you take the ACT or SAT? 12. The answer is 12. You can take it up to 12 times. I don't know anybody that's ever taken it 12 times, but you can take it up to 12 times. So in case you were wondering, I'd say plan for 3. Sometimes we get kids that have taken it 4 or 5, but honestly, that's a lot. Most kids tap out after about 2 or 3. Which test do most colleges prefer? Really, there is no preference. You can submit either test score to any college in the entire country. Now, I will be honest and say, if you're applying to a school on the East Coast that tends to be more SAT focused and you send them an ACT score, they're going to use that concordance I showed you, and they're going to take your ACT score and convert it into an SAT score. But likewise is true if you're applying to a school in the Midwest that's mainly ACT based. They're going to take an SAT score and convert it into an ACT score. So they're going to use that conversion chart just so that they can compare you to other students, but they don't care which one you submit. So that's why it's so important to figure out which test your child's better at taking and focus on getting that score as high as possible. I do have a question that says, do you have any ACT strategy courses in person in Columbus, Ohio? So we did used to offer in-person programming in Columbus, Ohio, and just due to staff and personnel and our growth in the Cincinnati area, we were growing in both places. Our owner decided to focus our energies on the Cincinnati location. So if you're in Columbus or outside of Cincinnati and you want to participate in our online programming, our online class is the exact same class taught by the same teachers that's just done online. So basically it's a PowerPoint. Instead of being sitting in the classroom, it's a PowerPoint. You can still ask questions. A lot of classes in session. We're going to go through the same information. You do have to be a little bit more self-motivated, because there's not going to be somebody sitting there timing you while you do the practice that you would normally do in the class in person. But it is an effective class, and we get good feedback on it. So definitely something to consider. I think I'll wait to see give you guys a couple more seconds to see if anybody has any other questions, but it looks like I think I've answered all questions that have been submitted so far. So I want to thank everybody for their time, and thank you for joining us. Again, please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. My name again is Sherry, and we appreciate you joining us this evening, and I hope you are leaving with a better understanding of when your child should be taking the ACT and/or SAT. Thanks a lot for joining us. Have a great evening.